main risks then as agencies go down this plain English program? So they say, yep, we want to do it. What would you be advising your senior executives about the risks they need to take into account?
Well, the first one is to look at the program design. If you're setting up the program too narrowly, just with some training or just by doing a style guide, for example, it's going to fail. It's going to fail. So taking a strategic approach, we've got 30 years experience now in Australia of training and style guides and individual elements that help to improve communications. We haven't yet really tied them together in an effective model and an effective strategy that is going to make that work. Having that driven at executive level is the second major risk. Losing a champion. Often these programs get started because somebody at director level or above wants to get something going. If that person leaves the organisation, then suddenly the program can fall over or wither. But some of the other risks are fairly practical. Not bedding down in the regular systems, that plain English culture. Often agencies, about half of the agencies that start out do succeed in making that kind of real investment, but only a third of them then consolidate it. So they sort of feel they've ticked the box, they've done plain English and they can move on. But even with something like staff turnover, for example, if you've got 5% of your staff turning over every year, it only takes a few years, unless you've got it bedded down in your underlying systems, it only takes a few years where you lose that critical mass and suddenly that old officialese culture can reassert itself.
Right. And I assume tied up with that, obviously, if you like, authorisation principles, in some agencies, famously, I think in defence, there used to be 12 levels of approval. They're the sort of things that you've really got to tackle.
Yeah, and that's a good example of the sort of system change that needs to happen. I mean, a lot of organisations, a document internally that's produced for a decision will go through 7, 10, sometimes 12 levels of people who are reading it. Yeah. I mean, in the digital environment, we've got so many more opportunities, and some governments are making the most of those opportunities with e-systems for document submission and transmission. But they're often still thinking about the same hierarchy, going through the same number of steps. We can use this opportunity not only with the digital revolution, but with the whole plain English approach to change some of those processes as well.
Right, and what I'm hearing is that we now have very well understood ways we can measure this, we can look at it. Perhaps 15, 20 years ago it wasn't the case, but now you can be quite confident about your ability to take a baseline and then move to a higher level.
The great thing about that 30 years of experience is we know what works. And agencies have a lot of experience with individual things. We've redone templates, we've rewritten style guides, we've trained people. We've got expertise, not always internally, often it involves bringing in external expertise, but we've got that expertise to make it happen. What we're not doing is tying that together well enough, but the good news is that we know that if we do take the right model, if we do take that as a strategic approach, that it works. That agencies do fundamentally transform their communications in a measurable way. 30 years ago when the federal government started out with its Simpler Forms project, we didn't have that evidence and we didn't have all of that experience. Now we do. We just need to really nail that model, and if agencies learn from that, they can get a guaranteed and certain result with achieving permanent clarity.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Neil. It's been very useful. It's a very exciting area, as you say. A lot of government agencies now starting to realise, because they're having to communicate directly with the public, not through media, through digital channels, how important this is. So I think this is a really interesting space, and we do hope that agencies really take up this opportunity.
And if we can match what we're doing with those digital transformations with the actual communication process and the content, then we're really going to realise the major benefits of those changes.